Check, check. Can you talk?
I can talk.
Sweet. Yeah, that's good.
Everything's all good.
Yeah, we're getting in the browser levels. And just say a sentence.
I can just say a sentence about the topic of this podcast.
Okay, and I will also say a sentence about the topic of the podcast. Looks like the levels are pretty good. Sweet. Um, okay, so let's kick it off. Welcome to this podcast. Let's do the intro music. Boop, 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 boop. Minna, 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 minna.
You know we got to get that AI generated music ASAP. I'm so looking forward to trying that out.
Absolutely. So, welcome to the podcast. This is a podcast about AI, design, the future, past, technology, etc., buzzwords, metadata. Um,
Just anything that's at the top of the bubble that we're all way too hyped on at the moment. That's like hype cycle stuff.
yeah. So we'll be sharing what we're hyped about today. So, without further ado, we have collected some links, I think, that we can kind of go through and just talk about what we think is interesting about them. Um, what do you think, Al?
Let's do it.
I guess before we start, we should probably introduce ourselves. My name is Patrick, and this is a podcast with my good friend Al. And we had a lot of conversations about AI, product, business, all those keywords, and decided it would be good to sort of open the conversation and just go through this and share cool stuff that's going on. So that's kind of my intent.
Yep, same here. Just an opportunity to spend more time in the space and get exposed to all the cool things that are happening right now because it's a really cool time for this.
Yeah, maybe we start with like, what does the time feel like? Um, for me, this time feels like when I first opened up Notepad. I was like, how does a website work? Like, view source, what's this thing?
Mm.
Open up Notepad, like, put it on. How did I even do a server back in the day? I probably was built into Windows somehow, a public folder, and then just seeing that like the things that I wrote in the notepad are now in a web browser, and the web browser is how I use everything else. It was pretty incredible feeling, and that's sort of what AI reminds me of. It's like this magical thing that with little effort I can see something that feels like it would be a lot of work to make previously.
Yeah, for me, it feels like it's. I'm thinking back to that time of like or like coding a first website and all that. To me, it kind of feels like making the first dynamic web page where it felt like there was somebody inside the computer kind of like changing things and doing stuff. And it was just, I remember at that moment thinking, like, oh my God, we could make anything. Like, you just make anything, right? And that's how this moment feels like again, without really knowing exactly what to make. Just like having like your mind blown completely by the possibility is kind of the feeling that I feel when I'm looking at this stuff and exploring. I'm just like, holy smokes, this could be anything.
Right. Yes, it could be anything. There's paralysis to that. So,
And we don't know what it is yet, and this is important. And it's the whole Marshall McLuhan thing of when TV first came out, they just put plays on TV, right? And when the internet first came out, it was all brochureware. It was just essentially brochures on the internet. And then it started to evolve and take on its own voice and discover its own voice. And it feels like we're kind of there, where we were just like, well, let's just make it do this other thing that was kind of already done, versus okay, now there's something like really new coming, and it's like just the beginning of the sort of like the new voice of kind of like the real Web3. That's what it feels like.
right. Right, and I guess so your point about brochureware is like the way we use new technology is by just doing the things that we did before in this maybe slightly better, but maybe less good way, in a kind of cheaper way. And so with a chat, it's like, oh, obviously I want to talk to this thing, and it's gonna like tell me stuff, and we're gonna have a conversation. But that means that we don't actually know what it's for yet. We're just putting it in a known frame because it's easier to use
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and some people. I think also like with Midjourney too, there's the debate about like why is this a Discord interface, right? And that's because it's building an interface for the whole thing is not possible because we don't really know how to use it yet. And so just having it completely wide open, to start feels like it makes a lot of sense. Like let's just chat and say stuff that we want, and we'll see what it can do because we don't even know what it can do yet.
Hmm. What have you found? I guess this brings us to our link section, but what have you found to be the most useful um, use of ChatGPT or Midjourney or what have you?
So what's been working for me is brainstorming and very light content generation and outlines. Like that seems to be like really high hit rate. Like if I'm trying to do that, like every time I do it, it works. Like that's where I've been able to essentially win every time I go in. Other stuff that I've sort of played around with is like fun, but it hasn't like really done anything, or like, and it doesn't always work in Chat GPT. But really like brainstorming and fleshing out a line of thinking. So, for example, like if you're thinking about, there's a business idea that I was thinking about launching. So, I was thinking, okay, well, asking a line of questioning that I would normally ask across a couple of days, across a ton of Google searches, across a bunch of documents, and then having to do sort of like a double diamond thing where you're sort of going way out and coming way down. It's just like that's really compressed, is what I've felt so far. So for me, that's personally where I've succeeded the most. I know other people are doing different stuff, but that feels most useful for me. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's been really programming. So I'm
Mm,
learning Unity, getting back into Unity script, as well as working with Raspberry Pi. And just like, I had a long conversation being like, how, when Raspberry Pi boots up, do I load a server that's controlled by a node script? And it's really good because it tells me about libraries I didn't know exist and like
mm,
different ways that I can do that that are you just have to trawl through so many forums to like get to the answer, and you have to make sure that it's been within the last year that that's still the software that's supported. But I think that as a starting point, it's been really good. I will say there's kind of a level of confidence which throws me off. So it's like, yeah, you can totally just like you want to control a Chrome instance with a node server? Sure, just like add this line of code. And then I add the line of code, and I'm like, it's not actually opening the window for Chrome. Oh, it's running a headless Chrome thing, which is in the background, and I actually wanted to see the browser. And so it's just like there's a level of like, you can totally do that. Here's the way to do that, but it's not actually what I want. And it's
yeah.
hard to specify because like knitting different programs together. But when it's like simpler stuff like Unity, how do I tween, an object to go from left to right?
Mm,
Uh, it's super, super clear. And often when learning a new language, it's not like I need a new concept. It's just I need to understand the syntax. So like in doing that in JavaScript, it's just a different syntax than in C sharp. So for
mm,
that kind of quick hit stuff, it's been good.
mm.
Um, yeah. So that's been my usage.
Nice. Um, the confidence thing, there's this is now called hallucinations, right? It's like and how to essentially make Chat GPT, um, or even Bing, like hallucinate, where you kind of like feed it questions to the point where you're backing into a corner where it doesn't know, and then it'll just make up the answer, right? Like
Yeah.
it's so like there's it's pretty well documented, I think, like how to create that bug of like how to push it into a corner where it'll just give you answers because you're asking for answers. It's kind of funny from a personality perspective that that's how it's working right now, right? It's like, no, I want you're asking me how to do something and I'm supposed to know, so here's how you do it. I'll give you my best answer. It never
Totally.
says I'm not sure, unless it's been kind of programmed to like, you're asking me how to, make a pipe bomb or whatever, right? It's like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm a large language model. I can't help you with that. But if it's, write this line of code to do this, yeah, I don't know, but okay, sure, here you go. Right? This is how you
Yeah.
do it.
And actually, it's kind of more unblocking than like, well, there's a bunch of ways you could do that. And here's, because I think what you're talking about is confidence is actually a good user experience. Like,
Yeah.
even if you're wrong, for you to give me a confident answer it allows me to continue. And maybe I don't actually need the exact right answer. Maybe I just need enough to continue. And it does remind me of Google or like search result pages, which is decidedly unconfident about things. I have no
Mm-hmm.
idea which one you want, but these guys paid to be here. And then here's 10 more things below. And it's like, no, I just want to know. And Google did release the knowledge box, they call it, on the top on mobile or on the right on desktop, which kind of tries to do that, is give you an answer. But
Mm.
all those answers are kind of caveated with, like, this is a link from this page and this is a link from that page. And so there is still a lack of confidence. Like, we're not willing to put ourselves behind the thing that you're seeing here. Whereas ChatGPT, you're like I've had a long conversation and it totally contradicts itself. I'm like, dude, you just contradicted yourself from like 5 sentences ago. It's like, oh, sorry, you're right. This is why I did that. And so, like, just having that confidence helps me
Mm.
use it. And then planning for it to be wrong helps me understand that it's fallible, you know?
Mm. Yeah, having that mindset, right? Of I think we're used to computers kind of always being right. Like, if you and so to accept that this could not be right, this could be wrong is a new paradigm. A thing that I heard that was really useful for interacting with AI was to imagine that it's a coworker and you're giving your coworker instructions and that their turnaround time is essentially instant. So rather than then coming back to you like a day later and saying, "Oh yeah, here's the thing that, you asked me to help out on. What do you think?" It's like they just come back right away with it, essentially. And so you're kind of feeding out tasks, and then everybody becomes a manager or an editor or a creative director or essentially the person who has the vision with a bunch of implementers, that they're kind of working with, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about it as an editor, because an editor's job is not necessarily to get the right answer. It's to string stuff together in a coherent way. And like you, that could be a bunch. You basically edit out a bunch of things, and so that does feel like a human capacity that we'll still lean on. So, should we jump into links?
Yeah, let's jump into some links. What'd you
Speaking of
find?
editors,
Yeah,
um, well, I'll throw them up here, and maybe you just shoot them to me over the video chat, and I'll put yours up.
okay.
But I'll go through mine.
I have one mega link essentially, so
You have one mega
that's
link. Okay.
one mega link. I'll
So
throw
I
in the
have, I
chat.
think I have five. So this is a good tweet thread on kind of like Westworld, but basically this study that looked at agents. It looked at putting ChatGPT agents. I don't know if it's ChatGPT. It's like a memory. It's like a large language model LLM agents. And so they basically have this process where you perceive. There's like a memory stream, which is kind of like a chat thread, I guess. Retrieve sort of memories, and then plan or reflect based on those memories, and then act. And so this is kind of like the model, the generative agent memory model. But what they did is they loaded 25 characters with a starting persona, including identity, information about other characters, relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and some intention about how to spend their day. Um, and so this is kind of like what they preloaded it. John Lynn is a pharmacy shopkeeper at the Willow Market who loves to help people. Um, yeah, so that's that. And then they just like set them up to go around and talk to each other. And yeah, apparently it worked really well. So I'll just like share that in the links. But this is there's an objective. So I'm planning this Valentine's Day party, and then they can go and talk to each other. Speaking of which, Isabella has invited us to the Valentine party. So they're kind of like passing on this information, which kind of is reality. Like, it's kind of like social interactions.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so this person says, I'm planning on attending. And then this person says back to this person, I heard that you're planning a Valentine's Day party. So I think that this is really interesting in a way to build a video game or a simulation, or maybe it's reality, that where there's a bunch of agents that are kind of on having ongoing conversations, and you actually just pop in to what's happening in that worlds. I think there's just so much to this, in terms of games, in terms of narratives, and in terms of universes.
Mm.
For me, um, we make escape games at Secret City, and I think what we do is we develop a world where you go into for an hour and you're dialoguing with these characters. But and then you have a movie, like a Marvel movie, where you have like Captain America for 2 hours. But really,
Hmm.
the value of the Marvel universe or the Star Wars universe is like all the other stories that are happening at the same time in different timelines. And so you can see that like the future of media storytelling narrative could be largely influenced by having character development up front and then kind of seeing how those characters interact um, through AI.
That one totally is just like as soon as you see it, and then you know, what was it like last year, 2 years ago? The whole simulation theory thing, got a lot of hype, and people are like, "Oh yeah, we're living in a simulation," right? That type of thing totally makes me feel like we're living in a simulation because this is, essentially first gen, AI. Somebody's hacking this together so quickly. Well, first gen, right? But maybe that's being a little bit rude. Um, it's the billion to one odds of us not living in a simulation. When you see that, it's like, yeah, totally billion to one, obviously, right? Like this is exactly what we're doing right now.
For sure. Yeah. And then you start to question who is real, which brings me to my next link. Um, is this project by WorldCoin? This is actually, I think Sam Altman kind of sponsored some of it, but this is the idea of that in this age of AI, you need to have people be able to like verify that they are in fact humans.
Mm,
So this is kind of like that's the premise. This is all set up on this premise that like AI is increasing, but like looking into the SDK here, um, there's a world ID that can be kind of minted in the same way that like you mint crypto,
yeah.
uh, but it's verified. It's like decentralized, verifiable, and it's funny because so much of this is what I worked on at Sidewalk. When I was at Sidewalk, a lot of the questions were around privacy. Who is able to go to the neighborhood? What's equitable? So for context, Sidewalk Labs was a city development in Toronto, plan for Toronto, where we were trying to take the best of the internet and the best of city planning, bring it together in a sustainable, walkable city with a high quality of life and low cost of living. So,
Mm,
as it happens, I spent most of my time working on distributed identity, and so this was like about privacy in the age of transactions within the city. And so part of the thesis was, as we have these more transactions as you're going about your day, you're buying your coffee, you're signing up for classes, you're booking a space, you're getting your rental, you're getting a job, you do all this stuff in the physical world. Um, it makes sense to have an identity because it makes all these transactions more convenient. Now, the truth is, uh, the most convenient way to interact with things is by using a credit card. You just use your credit
yep.
card, pay for stuff, get points. It's not the most privacy preserving way to do things, but it is the known way. And there is a UX benefit, there's a user experience benefit to just getting it done. Like they integrate with all the merchants and everywhere, and you just use the card. So the forcing function turned out to not be the city as the best place to do that, but rather instead of convenience, now we're seeing a force to distributed identity through AI. Because
Mm.
now you want to prove that you're a person because the essence of personhood is valuable on the internet. I don't want to be talking to a bot. I want to be listening to people. So I think it is really interesting to see if this does catch on as a international, global, digital way to preserve identity.
I've, it's really interesting you say like I don't want to be talking to a bot, and I feel like there's actually a lot of resistance to AI generated almost anything of like, well, did a person do it or did AI do it? And then you judge it differently, right? It's almost like racism or something. Like, like it's kind of like that of like you
It's
judge it
prejudice,
because of
yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's it's not about the work. You're judging it based on like who the creator is, right? And
Yeah.
so, I was thinking about that from the perspective of like when I'm reading content online, I'm like, is this AI generated? Is this like an AI generated bullet point list? Is this am I okay with that? Like, is it helping me, or am I like I think we're still at that phase in the cycle where we're second guessing everything as opposed to just accepting that no, like these creators are us, and maybe this thing that I'm reading is 90% AI generated, maybe it's 90% human generated, but it's some percentage, likely, right? Of like, there's there's a human there's a machine touch in here in some way. And then, bringing that back to the idea of, I don't want to be talking to a bot. It's like, well, what do I want to be consuming? And like, is it who made it, essentially, is a big part of that. And I wonder why. Like, why is that such a big deal? I'll share one last idea on this, which is just, when you're like buying like some product and there's a creator story, and there's this person who went to Japan to learn how to make these knives or whatever, and they did this long training and blah blah blah, and for some reason you kind of fall in love with that person and their story, and it makes the product better. And I wonder if there's something there that feels like it gets lost when we have things that are machine made, essentially, right? And especially like creative things or like products. What does it mean to have a machine made craft?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to plug into that. I think one of the things that it sounds like you're saying is that, there is the plane of rational exchange of items. I'm like, I bought a chair, I bought a photo, I bought a piece of music. But there's some other plane of like, we care about the origin and the story
Mm-hmm.
and like, where did that come from? Who made it? Do I know
Mm-hmm.
them? What am I participating in? What's the broader message that I'm sending by having this thing? What story can I tell when I tell people about this thing? And
Why
it
did they
does, yeah,
even bother doing this thing, right? It's like
yeah, I guess
I
there's,
think there's that whole thing of, look, you could beat up on start with why, but the why part really is compelling to us a lot of the time. If someone says, I believe this and this is why I believe that, it's related to my story in this way, that's something that feels like it's always easier, like that's compelling, and that's what we do in marketing. It's a big part of it is about the creator story, right? What happens when the creator story isn't there, or the creative story is not about a person, it's about a bot, essentially.
yeah. Well, it could be a bot generated story about a person.
Yeah.
This is where we need
um
the ID.
how about this? Let's jump to this one. Maybe you saw it. Is the here, I'll
Oh,
send you the
yeah.
link.
Future tools?
No, let's talk about that in a minute. This is more related. So Hustle GPT, maybe you've seen this. So a guy uh, essentially went in and said, "Hey, Chat GPT, I'm working for you. I'm your human liaison. I'm just your meat puppet here in the real world to bring your business ideas to life. I have $500. I want to make it 100,000 in as quick a time
Yeah.
period as possible, right?" And he started this experiment, and on like day 5 it was already at like 50,000 followers. Like everybody was super stoked about it. So one of the things that Chat GPT decided to do was create a paid membership community for other people to do the same thing and then share their results. So there's a membership site of like 4,500 people all doing Chat GPT hustles, where they're all essentially meat puppets now, just acting as a human liaison and plug-in or API for the things that ChatGPT can't connect with yet. And they're all just building business ideas. So Hustle GPT, I thought this was wild. There's such great implications here, and just such a fun journalistic experience as well.
So this is the guy who sort of said, "How can I make $100? Is that what's the fastest way to make, or what did he do?
100,000.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And then this is the community, which is one of the outputs that are running towards that 100K uh, target right now.
Interesting. I wonder just kind of like evolutionarily, what has that done? It's basically created this incentive to listen to the AI and do what the AI wants you to do it within a market-based society. What does that mean?
It's, I guess if it works, right? Like it's still an experiment. Maybe these guys make it way faster than anyone else. Maybe they don't. It's kind of like this is like a, it's funny because it's not business, it's not assisted. It's like 100%. Like he's just doing whatever it says, which is kind of like the shtick, right? So it's not like help me come up with some ideas. It's like no, you come up with the ideas. I'm just going to do it, and we're going to see how far you get. Chat GPT, right? It's like
Do
I'm
you
here for
think
you.
that do you think that ChatGPT told him to make a hashtag and like host Twitter Spaces?
I think that it did. I think he's like one-wanting it. Like whatever. He's literally like I said, he's like a meat puppet in the most hilarious way. So for
Wow.
example, he's on CNN or something, and they're like because it's a funny story, and I don't think it scripted the entire thing for him. He's answering questions as himself, but he's that appearance. He had to ask ChatGPT if it was okay for him to go do that, right?
I see. Right. Check with the agent. Crazy. Okay. Well, maybe we should do that with this podcast um, a bit more. Uh, should we jump to the next link? Future
Yeah,
tools?
sure. So there's a lot of these roundups out there, um, but I just like them. I keep finding new ones. This is one that somebody sent me the other day, and what I like about this is just the number of like. Don't even worry about the specific tools, right? Like, let's just look at all of these things. Yeah, look, podcasting, right? So here's a bunch of AI tools for podcasting. Now, it should be noted that a lot of these are landing pages where people are collecting emails and saying, like, yeah, it's coming soon, right? Yeah, we're working on it, right? Um, where I think we're not quite there yet. But there's a lot of these that are full blown tools that are, doing pretty great work. Um, and so, like, if you just scroll up to the top there for a second, and we look at there's like AI detection, aggregators, avatar tools, chat tools, copywriting tools, finance tools, just goofy stuff for fun, gaming, generative art, generative code, generative video, image improvement, image scanning, inspiration, marketing, motion capture, music, podcasting, productivity, prompt guides, research, self improvement, social media, speech to text to speech, text to video, right? Like translation, video editing, voice modulation. And each one of these has, like there's 1,300 tools on this thing. Some of them have, like 100, some of them have 50, some of them have 10, right?
Hmm.
Um, I just think that it's amazing how many verticals, like real niches, AI has already touched and started to do pretty well in. And actually, it's mostly within those verticals that is performing the best in these like really narrow agent activities.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's funny because we talk about Google with a bunch of search results versus ChatGPT, and I guess the meta thing here would be like, well, I guess that's what plugins are, is like, hey, help me just like do this in my ChatGPT. And I think it will be a battle for that text box, right?
Mm,
Because all these things will be like, cool, like that's great that you have like a cloud-based image generation tool with preloaded models. It's like ChatGPT should tell me about that. Do I really need
mm,
to go to this other website to do it? I wonder how much it will be aggregated in one chatbot, like the way that Google aggregated the web,
right.
or whether it will be just like this is infused to a bunch of apps, and then the aggregator is the app store, you know?
Yeah.
So
Are we going to see aggregation or are we going to see fragmentation here? Essentially, is what you're saying, right?
yeah, or well, I think we always see aggregation. The question is, at what level is it aggregated? So like the web was totally um decentralized, and then people started putting together like little websites that collect links, and then you had Yahoo as a links directory, and then that got to a scale where it's like this is not scalable. Google introduced PageRank, you type in a search word. So that's like the next level of aggregation. And then you had like all of these things, and the phone came out, and it's like, oh, okay, apps are the right way to go because they're just more
Mm-hmm.
reliable. And so now you have the app store is the method of
Mm-hmm.
aggregation. And I do wonder what that next level of aggregation is.
Like, what's the interface for all of these agents, like these like narrow AI agents that we're using for different tasks, essentially, right? Like, how do you access this? Because this is tough. This is like it's kind of a lot of work. Try the App Store, in itself is like crazy, place to go to try to find stuff. But yeah, like what is the aggregator, and how do we discover the best tools moving forward? And that's why I like aggregators like this, because it's the early days. We're just kind of, people are saying like there's still an opportunity here because it doesn't exist yet. I'm going to make it. I'm going to put it.
Totally.
I'm going to make the yellow pages online, right? That kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. And you remember when there was the App Store, and it was just like, I would go to the App Store and download the new apps. There was like whatever, like a beer
Yeah,
app, and like a
yeah,
fart app, and like a flashlight app, and like all these things that then either get integrated into the OS or become networks on itself, like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. So those things stand on their own, or they get owned by the OS. And then, like, what does the App Store become? It's majority games, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it kind of morphs in its use. And it's no longer not yeah, like you're saying, it's just like so many apps out there. And even these things are positioned as apps. Here's a thought is I
Mm,
wonder if the future of this kind of like, we talk about the list directory on Yahoo, talk about the aggregator of Google search, talk about the aggregator of app stores on the phone. What if the future aggregator is actually a kind of social network for AIs? And that like you actually follow this AI who's kind of doing the work you want to do, and you can like talk to them. I don't know what that looks like,
right.
but like
Yeah, yeah.
imagine the AI is the creator influencer that you
Yeah,
follow.
like you're meeting a person who's not a person, essentially, and that takes us back to the identity issue of, yeah, I can do this for you. You know what? I can create GPT prompts for markdown documents for you, no problem. I can do
Yeah.
that. It's like, hold on, who is you? Right? Like, like you just position yourself as a person or as a bot or what? Um,
Yeah, and I think I just read these things and they're just so abstracted because they have to be because they're a product. But if I had a feed and it was like, look at this dope grant, right? I just wrote, you know what I mean? And it was like a bot posting about the outputs of what they do, which I think is really cool about Midjourney. Is like you can say like stable diffusion AI generated image, or you can go to the Midjourney channel and just see people prompting and crazy cool images. And so
yeah,
like
yeah.
how can the outputs be like the future of the aggregation? It's like just a feed of like, holy crap, how did you do that? Kind of thing.
And to me, that's really part of the genius of the Midjourney Discord uh, thing is it forces discovery. Like, unless you're a like paid user working in your own private space, for everybody else who's essentially not an expert, you're getting constant exposure and inspiration to what other people are doing, to the point where it's like brutal for your workflow to actually get stuff done. And they've like prioritized that so much that to me that's genius. As far as this is such a nascent space, nobody has an idea where it's going. Let's just see what we're all doing together, and as part of using this product, we're just going to shove what everybody else is doing in your face, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a bold design decision as far as how to let people interact with the product. Like, I don't know if I could have made that decision, as product person, and said like, yeah, this is the way we should do it, if it wasn't for the fact that it's also such a great interface for, uh, again, we don't just language prompting, essentially, right? Like, we don't have an interface for like, these are the things we think people want to click the most often, and there's a clear workflow. We have no idea what their workflow is. You share the stuff, you get some results, you tweak the results, you throw it away, you share the stuff, you tweak some results, etc., right? um, yeah, this idea of social discovery is really exciting. There's something fun there. I got a question for you. Who do you think this is going to favor? Because on one side, you could say, like, look, anybody with momentum already is going to win. If you're already like Notion and you have a great text editor and people can just like copy some text and press the magic button to make that text better, they're going to win. Or is it going to be, upstarts have the opportunity to come in, for disruption? Who do you think the current environment favors right now?
If I look at just like we were talking about, like the web, like HTML when it first came out, like GeoCities or whatever. If you look at those moments of technological transition, it's not the incumbent who wins. So I do
Hmm.
think there will be just we are thinking about this still as like we talked about apps. Oh, these are websites. These are web apps that you go to. Oh, this is like a chat bot. It's like a chat that I know. It's not a thing you know. You don't
Yeah, yeah.
know what this is. And I think that that means you need a totally new way of thinking, which means a new interface. And I do think we will see it and we will be like, obviously, it's a search box for the internet. Oh, obviously, it's a directory aggregated by category. Oh, obviously, it's a bunch of apps I download to my phone. It will be obvious, but I don't think we've seen it yet.
No, we're
And I,
not there yet. I
yeah.
agree. We're not there yet.
Yeah, but you were talking about the genius of the Discord for Midjourney, and it made me think about creative tools. Like Adobe is another like moment in history was Photoshop, and then they've largely done acquisitions, latest being potentially Figma if that goes through. But those creative tools start with, "Hey, welcome to the app. Here are all your tools. Here are like four templates to get started," right?
Hmm.
And it's almost inverted. So now the discovery of creative tools is like, here's a template. Like you can use this prompt if you want to jump straight into it. And it's like the tool is just your text. And so I do wonder, what does that mean when your first introduction to the tool isn't a blank canvas, but like it's actually like an infinite amount of templates that you can then use to customize. That's like it's different. It's a different creative tool.
Mm. So is it like so you don't start with? It's not just like you draw up what you want. It's like these are all these starting points.
Yeah, like if I go to Midjourney, like I literally went to Midjourney yesterday because I was working on the website, and I just signed up yesterday because I was like, I need a picture of a castle, a picture of a boat on Lake Ontario, and a picture of a pioneer village for Secret City. And I just looked for sketch in the Midjourney thing, and there was like 1,000 results. And I just
Hmm.
looked at this one that was a prompt. It was like Studio Ghibli, kids sketch, line
Yep.
art, blah blah blah, and just I put castle in Toronto, and boom, that's it. And so I didn't have to think about that prompt. I just had to browse for the
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
thing that I wanted, and I just used that. Whereas if I went to Illustrator, it'd be like, okay, now what stroke do I want? Like, okay, how am I going to draw this thing? What's my reference? It's just like so much tool building before you get to the output you want. Like the future of AI is you start with the output you want and then you refine it back to what you're looking for.
There's a little bit there. Like I would posit that I think part of the challenge is, well, what inputs get me to the output that I want. And so, in Illustrator, you're like, okay, yeah, you've got to know how to use this tool to draw these lines. And that's part of the output that I want. It has this style of line work. Or, oh, there's this weird gradient around, the turrets of the castle. How do I make a gradient? I don't know how to make a gradient. I learned how to make a gradient. And all of that ladders up to, let's say, the Studio Ghibli style, right? Or Ghibli. I don't know how to say it. In the context of Midjourney is more about, okay, well, you've got the image style that you want. It's like, okay, well, what are the prompts to get there? And the prompts are, probably like 80 or 90% of it was there what you wanted essentially, and maybe it was like a couple of tweaks. Somebody still had to make it in the first place, just like, if you had that reference and somebody had hand drawn it or drawn it in Illustrator, somebody still had to make it, right? um, but now it's just so available to us, like you said, to just sort of take the template off the shelf. So I guess what I'm saying is yes, and uh, yes, like it's we still need to make it, and there's so much that's already made. and you can just take so much off the shelf. The distance between you and what you want is so much shorter. Like the time frame is just so compressed. It's
Yeah.
almost challenging, like to get the output so quickly for people who've been creators for a while, because you're used to like waiting, and almost like you've got processing cycles of like, okay, when this is done, I'm going to do this with it, and then that's what's going to happen. For me, I'm almost like, oh geez, this is done already. I don't know what to do next. I was going to be thinking about that while I was working on this part.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, so there's like way more possibilities now. Um, I guess I just think about abstraction. It's like a layer of abstraction. So like, at the base level you have assembly, and then you're like writing ways to put pixels on screens, and then you're like making a vector library that draws lines, and then you got a GUI, and then you get Illustrator, which is like now you have a line tool and a circle tool. Those are both abstracting some deeper computation that's going on there. And then you have now an abstraction which, like you're saying, is like somebody had to draw it at some point. So there's basically all these illustrations out on the internet, and the level of abstraction is no longer about like the vector drawing capabilities of the computer, but actually it's like this repository of all the outputs that you know are on the computer in some way. And now you need tools to kind of make sense of that chaos. So I think again we end up in this place where it's like, what is the aggregator? Because I guess, with the aggregator thought, Illustrator is an aggregation of graphic library functionalities. So the
Mhm.
circle, they chose to make it a circle. Like that's just a math function that they chose to make because it's a convenient aggregation of the graphical capabilities of the computer. And so, like, yeah, what will be those creative tools of the future? Because it won't be draw a circle. It will be like make a feature film. Like it'll be some bundle of crazy amounts of work that would have taken so long to do before. Yeah,
And then we're going to be in that situation where you can imagine a time in the very near future where there's more content and artwork and code written by machine than by people, right? Like that's not far out. Like, you know what I mean? Like already, there's
yeah,
bots on Twitter and all kinds of like, there's SEO bots, and we've been doing this for a long time now in very specialized ways, but just kind of generally, you can see that turning like very quickly, like just the percentage going up. Like there's that Chat GPT chart that you showed earlier in terms of like performance on these different exams over time, and sort of like the human level of performance versus the. I think there's one for output as well, just like total volume. And then as soon as we start having someone makes like an AI creator and says like, here is your parameters, just like those like little social bots, and says, this is what you're inspired by. These are your beliefs. This is the artists who are your heroes, or these are the copywriters who you really look up to and try to do their work. All right, go ahead, make your stuff. I'm actually not even going to give you any prompts. I'm just going to give you a motive, essentially, to go create
mm,
the way that we feel as artists. That's gonna be wild, dude.
yeah. So I think there's two models we talked about. One is like there's these AIs that are creators, and you're following them to get like the coolest things. And then there's almost like your children, like you are spawning these little uh bots or AIs with their own little
Yeah,
missions, and you're helping them. You're basically coaching them along the way. Yeah, that's fascinating.
the whole like godlike creation or godlike conversation comes into play like real quick. Of are we gods now? Like, is this like our species that we just created? Yeah, it gets that gets really weird. It's exciting. That's exciting. We got to talk about this more another time.
All right, so next link. Ready?
Yep.
Speaking of gods, here we go. I'm gonna see if this audio works. Um,
I'm not hearing the audio myself, but that's just me.
Okay, so this is I'll just link it, but this is basically um, somebody asking about the happiest day of this robot's life and the saddest day of their life. It is crazy the facial expressions. I'll just kind of like play this like that. And yeah, just like speaking of the interface that we need to feel like this is a thing we're talking to, it's an illusion. It's not actually like a person. I mean,
Mm,
clearly this robot's not a person, but we feel like even just the chat is a person because of the way that the interface works.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that we'll just see that more and more. It will come closer and be more and more believable that you're talking to a human, even though you're not. Or are you? And are we gods, or are these things just little programs?
Mm. That one, extrapolate that out, it's Blade Runner, man. It's like, and like the identity question too of like, are you a replicant or are you a, human? And it's almost impossible to tell. Like that's what that whole movie was about. It's about identity and the difference between man and machine. It doesn't matter. And like, why are we prejudiced in the end? Getting, man, I'm just realizing how far ahead of its time that movie really was in terms of the themes, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
insane.
it is insane. Science fiction extends the boundaries of design. I don't know, of thought. So here's another one. This is I thought this was cool because it's a platform, but it's legs and knobs for IKEA. Have you seen this thing?
Like IKEA hacks.
It's like IKEA hacks, but like a really nicely done IKEA hacks thing that's not
Nice.
IKEA.
Yeah.
And it just made me think about like if IKEA is kind of like the commoditized standard, you can always build a premium on top of that,
Yeah.
especially if you have like the right screws and the right little finishes, fixtures.
That's great. I love the design styling of this for one, and I also love the idea of plugging into a massive installed base of users essentially and sort of like selling your stuff on top of it. It's like selling into Salesforce or selling in through Shopify or selling in through HubSpot. Um, you've got that installed base of users. You just make your stuff work with it, and then give them a little upgrade. It's like, hey, it can be more of what you want. Oh, it can be more stylish. Here you go. More you
Totally.
need.
Um, I will. These are like a random set of links, but I'll blow through them. So one is that CSS introduced text wrap balance. This is not AI, but I think it is a good example of something that we in school were taught to think a lot about,
Mm,
but has been kind of put into an algorithm. So that's like a good thing for readability on the web. And it was like something that was really hard to do. You'd have to like do explicit line breaks, but it just feels really good. And so it's nice to see these things get automated. But also, it's okay if
mm.
somebody loses a job doing this. Like nobody should have to be subjected to that.
Yeah, exactly. This is like the whole argument of we're going to lose jobs to AI. It was like, well, did anybody really want to be doing that with most of their time for the rest of their life? It was like, no, it was part of making something beautiful overall and legible and useful, but it wasn't a part that, like you said, saying humans shouldn't be subjected to it is maybe a little strong. Like, let's start with like the mines and like getting rid of like hazardous jobs. But this
Sure.
is honest. There's a scale there, and like I would say this falls on the part of the scale where it's like no, we have better uses of human time. If it can be automated, it should be automated. If the total result is the same.
Yeah, I guess to bring it back to our point about like the time we're in, is this took a long time to get to. Like people were complaining about this,
Mm,
since the 90s,
totally.
and it took like somebody a lot of attention and effort to evaluate the line length on each of these things and calculate what a balanced paragraph is versus a not balanced paragraph. And that's kind of like them putting their agent into the world which has been such an effort. Like to do this, it's such an effort. But in the future, putting your like what you've realized, the nuance and the sensitivity you have for something like line length into the world, it will be just much more straightforward. You will be able to do this by just writing out the rules rather than having to go through the whole
Yeah,
browser
yeah,
stack.
yeah. Which is great. Like to me, that's so positive. Um, and think about, it's like with all those extra hours of humans not having to worry about that, what are they going to be able to put their time to that's more valuable, essentially, is what we get from this small thing. Anybody who's had to spend time on that can now kind of like raise their attention to a higher order problem. Um, or even just another part of the craft that's not automated yet that perhaps they still enjoy. So, yeah, no, I feel it.
Totally. So to that end, two more that I'll kind of group together into one theme, which is doing really hard things really fast. So this is an AI based Unity interface. Can create 100 random cubes, move the game objects so that they're an absolute value of y, and it basically just makes the whole thing. So it's like Unity's pretty complicated,
Hmm.
especially doing batch things like this. Um, Create a large collider so that they bounce off the floor, move them 3 units upper, so move them up, and then lighting, and then they just drop them, and you've basically got this whole scene with physics and everything, and you didn't have to touch any menu in the program. So I thought that
Mm,
was like a really good example of making a complex program accessible through text.
mm.
And then the other one is Blender GPT. I don't know if there's a screenshot here, but shaders are actually like one of the hardest things to do in 3D. They're like
Yep.
super fast filters for dealing with like, graphics level APIs. And you can literally just write like a shader with your text. I wish I had a better example here. Um, Yeah, I don't. Anyway, it's just another example of how like 3D becomes more accessible with plain language. So very exciting.
It's more accessible with plain language. That seems like the theme, right? Like just kind of describe it because that's how the AI learned was like us just kind of tagging everything, right? And then it's like, oh, well, if we know the tags, then you can create it without knowing the tools. It's kind of like tags became the new tools in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Back to the written word. Cool.
Hey, what did you change your mind on during the course of this podcast?
I got a noodle on I got a noodle on the mid journey thing around like the product decision to do something that's scrappy but actually has like an affordance that you wouldn't get if you were to like make an app. I think there's a couple pieces there that's like it's really easy to for them because they don't have to build a front end or
Yep.
even like a login system.
Mm-hmm.
It's community based. So like you see the activity of a bunch of people around you.
Yep.
It's like templates, it's like instructions are the onboarding. It's like just being astounded by the creative things that people are doing. And then it is I think the other yeah, so I think that's one piece, which is the mid journey piece. And the other piece for me, takeaway is like maybe the future of aggregation is that AI is not one thing, but they're many things, and you follow them and you also coach them. Like I think that is a super interesting relationship. I'm getting coached by an AI and I am coaching an AI at the same time.
Yeah. For me, it's I don't know, having a little time to just think through that little simulation that you shared, the idea of identity and the idea of human made versus machine made, and that where those are all pointing to, not next month or not in the next quarter. I don't think like things are moving fast, but like I'm being pretty generous here saying it's not going to happen in a quarter. The idea that there's going to be so many AI creators and essentially co-workers um, and vendors like people were buying from, and the sort of next level up will be, or could be, creating a motive and creating a goal and an objective at a very high level to create multiple outputs, not just one at a time. That this is like, don't just give me this one image. It's I want you to, be the best artist you could be and create a lifetime of work, by the time I wake up in the morning and just run all those cycles, right? Like that, or and not just as when I say artist, I mean generally creator. Like anything AI can create now. Imagine removing yourself one layer from just working on the prompts to working on, like that little simulation thing that you shared. What are their motives and like what are they trying to get done and do? Um, Creating that and allowing that to generate a bunch more generative pieces is kind of mind blowing to me. That's like freaky, but like amazing
Yeah.
and very special.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, maybe that is the layer of abstraction, is like it is a universe. And like everybody's got their own little universe they're working on, where there's agents working with each other. Crazy, man. Well, this is a good way to start the Tuesday.
All right. Thanks for the time this morning. Thanks for sharing the links. Thanks to anybody who made it to the end. And we'll see you next time when we actually have a name for this thing.
The AI will tell us.
All right. See ya.
See ya.